For as long as human memory could reach, stories had been told of great disasters that struck the earth every 10,000 years. These were not ordinary stories whispered for entertainment. They were warnings written into ancient tablets, carved on stone walls, and passed down in myths that traveled from one generation to the next. The elders would speak of skies turning dark, oceans boiling with fury, and entire civilizations vanishing without a trace. To some, these were just legends. But to others, they were the shadows of something very real, a reminder that humanity had never been alone in the universe. People often dismissed these old tales as imagination, the kind of dramatic folklore that ancient societies created to explain natural disasters. But there were always strange gaps in history that gave weight to the legends. Whole cities that should have thrived had instead disappeared suddenly. Records of advanced cultures were cut short, as if they had been erased in a single night. Archaeologists uncovered ruins that were far older than expected, showing signs of advanced knowledge that didn't fit with the timeline. Something had happened, and it wasn't just the work of time or nature. Generations grew up with the uneasy feeling that maybe the stories were not just myths, but cycles. Each time humanity rose, something would come to push it back down. It was like a clock ticking, silent and invisible, waiting for the next reset. The shadow of fear stretched across thousands of years, shaping how people looked at the stars. Instead of symbols of wonder, the night skies carried a sense of warning. There was beauty in the stars, yes, but also the weight of a question. What if the destroyers were out there waiting? For centuries, humanity had been too small, too fragile to even think about fighting back. When the fear grew heavy, people found comfort in the thought that maybe the cycle would not come again in their lifetime. People buried themselves in their daily struggles, farming, trade, survival, because what else could they do against an enemy that might control the heavens? Fear became part of human culture, but it was quiet fear, not loud panic. It was the kind of fear that whispered in the background, shaping beliefs, religions, and traditions. But as humanity grew, so did its curiosity. The more people studied history, the more they saw strange patterns. Entire civilizations seemed to vanish around the same rough span of time, every 10,000 years or so. It wasn't exact, but close enough to raise questions. How could great societies with no major wars or internal collapse suddenly be gone? The cycle was too regular to ignore. It was as though someone, or something, was pressing a reset button over and over again. By the time humanity reached the modern age, the legends had mostly become curiosities, kept alive in dusty books and obscure academic circles. Technology and science gave people confidence. Machines, satellites, computers, all these made humans feel stronger than ever before. The old fears began to feel outdated, like the fears of the dark before fire was discovered. Yet, even in this age of progress, there were those who studied the past carefully. Quietly, they noted the timing. Quietly, they wondered if the cycle was due again. And quietly, they feared. The strange thing about fear is that it can exist even without proof. No one had ever seen the destroyers with their own eyes. No one could say for sure what wiped out those civilizations of the past. And yet, in the collective memory of humanity, the fear lived on. It was passed in bedtime stories, in half-forgotten religious warnings, in folk songs sung without understanding their origin. Humans, deep down, carried the weight of it. They didn't need proof. They just knew. The most frightening part was the silence. If something had attacked Earth before, why were there no survivors to warn the future generations in clear words? Why were the signs so hidden, so broken, so scattered across ruins and myths? It was almost as if the destroyers wanted fear to linger, but truth to vanish. The silence of history felt louder than any evidence. That silence told humanity that when the time came, there might not be a chance to explain. Ordinary people went about their lives, working, loving, building, never knowing the depth of the shadow that stretched behind them. But somewhere in hidden labs, in secret archives, and in the quiet minds of those who studied history closely, the truth was being pieced together. They began to realize that humanity might be standing at the edge of the cycle once more. The stars looked the same as they always had, but the fear whispered louder. It is coming again. The fear did not shout. It did not cause chaos in the streets. It worked like a ghost, always present, shaping decisions quietly. Why did people look for weapons beyond Earth? Why did they push for colonies on distant planets, even when survival at home was not fully solved? Somewhere deep inside, humans were preparing, even if they didn't admit it. The shadow of fear had become part of their instinct, part of their survival. But this time, something was different. Unlike the ancient civilizations, modern humanity had reached the stars in its own small way. They had telescopes to search the skies, satellites that could watch the heavens, and ships that could cross the void. For the first time in history, humans were not blind in the dark. For the first time, they had a chance to look back at the fear that haunted them and say, "Not this time." Still, the waiting was the hardest part. Waiting for something unseen, something only known through whispers and ruins, was a heavy burden. People lived their lives as if nothing was wrong, but those who knew the truth felt every day as a countdown. Would tomorrow be the day? Would next year? Would the cycle strike again while they were still alive? The shadow of fear stretched across the world, but so did a spark of determination. Fear had always made humans bend, but it had never fully broken them. Again and again, humanity had risen after every disaster, stronger than before. This was their nature, not just to survive, but to resist. And though they carried the weight of fear, they also carried the fire of defiance. Deep down, the story of humanity was not one of victims, but of fighters. And so, beneath the long shadow of fear, something was quietly growing. It was not yet visible, not yet ready, but it was there, a resolve. If the cycle truly came again, if the destroyers really returned, then maybe this time the story would not end the same way. Maybe this time the shadow would not be the end of humanity's story, but the beginning of something far greater. The world had grown used to the rhythm of life, work, family, dreams, and small struggles that filled each day. People stared at their phones more than the skies, busy chasing opportunities and distractions. But slowly, quietly, something began to change above them. It wasn't obvious at first, nothing dramatic like fire falling from the heavens. The change began as whispers, small reports from astronomers and observatories scattered across the globe, a flicker where no flicker should be, a shadow that did not belong to any planet or star, a strange light that appeared, moved, and then vanished. At first, no one outside those circles paid attention. Space always had mysteries. Stars pulsed, comets streaked, meteors burned. To most people, these anomalies were nothing more than science headlines that barely made it past the evening news. But to the people who studied them, the patterns were troubling. Lights weren't supposed to move against the natural flow of stars. Shadows weren't supposed to remain fixed, blocking starlight again and again in perfect rhythm. Something was there, something that didn't fit. When the first official reports were published, they were wrapped in careful words. Scientists spoke of unidentified phenomena, avoiding stronger terms that could cause panic. Governments downplayed it, suggesting that the lights were just space debris or instrument glitches. But in the back rooms of research centers, tension grew. These were not mistakes. The lights had intent. They appeared in ways too precise to be random. They clustered in formations, as if they were part of something much larger. Then came the day when amateur stargazers noticed it too. Ordinary people with backyard telescopes began sharing videos and photos online. Strange moving dots, shining brighter than satellites, gliding across the night sky in patterns too sharp to ignore. Suddenly, the mystery was not confined to experts. The world's eyes were turning upward. Conversations began to shift from curiosity to unease. What were these things? Why now? Why here? It was as though the legends, the warnings whispered from the past, were stirring again. People who had never cared about myths began revisiting them, wondering if the stories of great cycles and vanishing civilizations had been true after all. The timing felt too sharp, too precise. Humanity had reached an age of technology, of boldness, of pride, and suddenly the sky was answering back. The signs grew harder to dismiss. Lights appeared in places where no satellites should be. They moved faster, then slowed, then disappeared in ways no human technology could replicate. Pilots flying at high altitudes reported seeing strange glows above the clouds. Ships at sea spotted objects darting across the horizon before fading into the void. Every sighting carried the same cold weight. These were not accidents. Someone or something was watching. Governments could no longer hide the truth. Quietly, they called meetings, gathered experts, and reviewed centuries of records. Old documents once dismissed as superstition were read again with new eyes. In the archives of forgotten libraries, in the carvings of ancient stones, in the songs of tribes that had survived untouched for centuries, the warnings repeated. Every cycle, they come from the sky. Every cycle, they watch. Every cycle, they strike. For ordinary people, the fear was different. They did not sit in closed rooms or read dusty books. They simply looked up and saw the lights for themselves. Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Social media filled with shaky videos of glowing shapes darting across the stars. News anchors tried to stay calm, but their voices trembled. The unease spread like ripples through water. Humanity had always loved to dream about aliens, to imagine first contact. But this didn't feel like a dream. It felt like the beginning of something darker. The strangest part was the silence. Whoever, or whatever, was behind the lights never tried to speak, never sent a signal, never showed themselves openly. They only watched. That silence was more terrifying than any threat because it left humanity guessing. Were they scouts, preparing for something bigger? Were they measuring Earth, counting its defenses, studying its people? The silence turned fear into imagination, and imagination made the terror even worse. But not everyone gave in to panic. In hidden bases, military leaders began drafting plans. Ships were moved into orbit, satellites were reprogrammed, and secret weapons were tested in the dark corners of space. Scientists worked day and night, gathering data, building models, trying to predict what was coming. For the first time in history, humanity was preparing not for each other, but for something beyond the sky. The signs grew clearer as months passed. The lights multiplied, forming arcs that circled the planet. They weren't random anymore. They were positioning. Like hunters surrounding prey, they seemed to be taking places, waiting. That realization shook the world in ways no war or disaster ever had. People who had once laughed at legends now prayed to them. Leaders who had ignored warnings now spoke of defense. Humanity had always fought among itself, but now, for the first time, there was a sense of unity in fear. And yet beneath the fear, another feeling began to rise: determination. The old cycle had always ended the same way, with silence, with erasure, with civilizations lost. But this was a different humanity. This was a humanity that had crossed oceans, broken the sound barrier, walked on the moon, and built machines that touched other planets. This was not the same fragile species that had been wiped away before. The fear was real, but so was the fire to resist. The skies above had become a battlefield of silence, and the signs were impossible to ignore. Children pointed at them, Poets wrote about them, and soldiers studied them. Everyone felt it. History was turning again. But this time, perhaps, the ending would not be the same. The lights still moved, mysterious and patient. They had not struck yet, but the world could feel it. Every glowing trace across the stars felt like a warning. We are here, we are watching, and soon, we will act. Humanity stood under that silent message, caught between dread and defiance. The sky had spoken in its own way, and now, the question was no longer whether the legends were true. The question was whether humanity was ready for the moment that was coming. Because one thing was certain, the signs in the sky were not just signs, they were the beginning. The world no longer looked the same after the lights appeared in the sky. At first, people thought it was just curiosity, something to watch and talk about. But as days turned into weeks, curiosity hardened into tension. The lights did not go away. They multiplied. They moved in ways too deliberate to ignore. It felt like standing in a quiet room, knowing someone was there with you, breathing, waiting, but never showing their face. Governments tried to calm the people with speeches about safety and monitoring, but those words sounded empty. Deep down, everyone knew the truth. Something was coming. The sky had become a mirror of dread, reminding humanity every night that it was not alone. And as that fear spread, a storm began to gather, not of wind or rain, but of preparation, doubt, and determination. In hidden command centers across the globe, leaders sat around glowing screens, watching the strange objects move. Some voices argued for peace, suggesting that the visitors might be explorers, not enemies. Others, harder and colder, insisted that history had already given the answer. The old legends told the story clearly. Whenever they came, civilizations vanished. Why should this time be any different? The arguments grew louder, sharper. Some wanted to build weapons that could reach deep into space. Others wanted to send signals, to attempt communication. Every plan carried risk, but doing nothing felt even worse. It was like seeing storm clouds gather on the horizon and pretending the rain would never fall. Everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the silence above broke. For ordinary people, the fear was woven into daily life. Streets were still crowded, markets still opened, children still went to school. But under the surface, everyone carried the same heavy question. What if they come tomorrow? Families began to stockpile food, not because anyone told them to, but because instinct demanded it. Farmers whispered of strange disruptions in the fields, sudden animal migrations, birds flying in nervous patterns. Fishermen spoke of nights when the waters glowed strangely, as if something beneath the sea was watching too. The storm was not just in the sky. It was in the hearts of people everywhere. Yet, amidst the fear, something remarkable began to happen. Borders that once seemed unbreakable began to blur. Nations that had been rivals for decades suddenly opened channels to share information. Military leaders who had once eyed each other with suspicion now spoke with urgency, because the threat above was bigger than any human conflict. Old grudges lost their meaning when the very survival of humanity was at stake, and in that fragile cooperation, plans began to take shape. Fleets of warships were quietly refitted, their technology upgraded in ways the public never knew about. Factories ran through the night, building machines that had never been tested before. Scientists, who once competed against each other, now worked side by side, trading knowledge like soldiers passing ammunition. The storm that gathered was not just one of fear, but also of strength. Still, the visitors did not reveal themselves. The lights circled the planet like silent predators, never attacking, never speaking. It was as though they were waiting, studying, testing the patience of humanity. The waiting was torture. Soldiers drilled endlessly, preparing for battles they could not imagine. Pilots sat ready in their cockpits, engines humming, watching the skies as though expecting the enemy to appear any second. The silence was heavy, pressing down on the world like a weight. But fear has a way of forging courage. Across cities and villages, people began to talk about survival, about unity, about standing together no matter what came. Stories spread of small acts of bravery, neighbors protecting each other, strangers helping families they had never met before, communities forming plans in case the worst happened. Humanity had always been divided by countless small differences, but the storm above was bigger than all of them. At the same time, whispers of the old cycle grew louder. Some believed the visitors were unstoppable, that resistance would only lead to destruction. They spoke of surrender, of hiding, of trying to survive in silence, but others refused. They pointed to humanity's history, not just the wars and struggles, but the resilience, the times people had risen from impossible odds. Humanity had walked on the moon, built cities that touched the clouds, cured diseases once thought eternal. Why should they bow to fear now? As the debate raged, the lights in the sky grew bolder. They came closer, brighter, forming patterns that stretched across the night. Whole towns gathered outside to watch them, standing shoulder to shoulder in silence as the sky burned with strange movements. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like fire dancing on the edge of a forest. And then, the first true sign appeared. One night, over the ocean, fishermen reported seeing a massive shadow blotting out the stars. It was larger than any ship humanity had ever built, silent and steady as it drifted above the waves. When the story reached the world, fear turned into certainty. They were not just watching anymore. They were here. The storm gathered faster now. Humanity no longer asked if the visitors would act. The question became when. Every passing hour carried the weight of expectation. Military satellites tracked the objects with trembling precision. Leaders gave orders behind closed doors, their faces pale but resolute. People prayed louder, worked harder, loved deeper, as though every moment might be their last. But inside that fear, a fire was building. Humanity was no longer the same species that had once been erased in silence. This time, the storm would not find a helpless world. It would find a world ready to fight, ready to resist, ready to prove that its place among the stars was not so easily erased. The gathering storm pressed heavier each day, but it also revealed something hidden within humanity. An iron thread of defiance, woven through every generation, every struggle, every victory. The visitors might have come countless times before, but this time the world would not kneel quietly. This time the storm would break differently, and as the strange lights flickered in the night sky, the people of Earth stood waiting, afraid, yes, but no longer alone. They were united by the storm, forged by the silence, and ready for whatever came next. The skies had grown darker, the tension heavier, but deep inside the hearts of humanity, a spark was alive. A storm was gathering, yes, but so was the resolve to meet it. The first true encounter did not happen with a sudden explosion or a dramatic invasion. It began with silence, then a test of patience, and finally a test of willpower. For weeks, the strange lights in the sky had circled the planet, drifting, like predators waiting for the right moment. Humanity's defenses were ready, but the question still haunted everyone. Would they attack first, or wait until Earth made a mistake? That moment came when one of the massive shadows descended from orbit. It moved with a terrifying calm, blotting out the stars above the ocean. Satellites caught every detail of its enormous frame, larger than any city built on Earth. When its presence was announced, the world seemed to hold its breath. On every screen, in every home, people watched the colossal shape hover over the waters like a mountain in the sky. No message was sent, no sound was made. It simply waited. Ships from Earth's navies moved carefully into position, their crews nervous but determined. For many of them, this was the moment they had trained for, but never truly believed would come. Engines hummed, weapons remained locked, but orders were clear. Do not strike unless attacked. Then, as if testing the courage of humanity, the massive craft released a smaller vessel. It streaked across the sky, its glow brighter than lightning, before slowing just above the waves. The water boiled beneath it, the air shimmered, and the sound it produced rattled the bones of those who watched. It was not just a machine, it was a challenge, an announcement that the visitors were no longer content to remain unseen. At that moment, the world's leaders had to make a decision: strike first, and risk declaring a war that might destroy the planet, or hold their ground and risk showing weakness. The debate raged in secret rooms, but for the soldiers at sea, the waiting was unbearable. Every second felt like a lifetime. Every heartbeat echoed like thunder in their ears. Finally, one of Earth's warships was chosen to make contact. It approached the glowing vessel with caution, broadcasting messages of peace in every known frequency. The response was silence, not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of superiority, like a teacher ignoring the questions of a child. And then, without warning, the visitor's craft pulsed with energy. A wave of force rippled across the water, slamming into the warship with such strength that its crew was thrown to the ground. Alarms blared, decks shook, and metal groaned, but the ship held firm. It was not destroyed. It was tested. The message was clear. They could destroy humanity easily if they wished. But instead of backing down, the warship roared back to life. Its engines surged, its weapons locked, and for the first time in history, humanity did not bow. The commander of the ship gave the order to stand tall, to face the challenge without flinching. The crew, though terrified, rose to their stations, with fire in their eyes. Across the world, people watched the encounter unfold. They saw the mighty alien vessel unleash its power, and they saw their own ship survive. It was battered, shaken, but unbroken, and that small defiance became a spark that lit the hearts of billions. For the first time, humanity saw proof that resistance was possible. The clash was not of weapons, but of wills. The visitors pressed harder. More vessels descended, surrounding Earth's fleets with an overwhelming presence. They unleashed storms of energy across the skies, bending lightning into shapes that seemed unnatural. Earth's ships responded not with blind aggression, but with precision. They maneuvered, adapted, and proved that they would not scatter like frightened prey. The storm of wills raged for hours. At times it seemed certain that the visitors would crush humanity in an instant, but instead they held back, as though studying, probing, measuring the spirit of the humans who dared to face them. Humanity, in turn, refused to bow. They answered silence with courage, intimidation with resilience, and overwhelming power with determination. In one moment that would never be forgotten, a squadron of human fighters flew directly between two alien vessels. Their orders were not to attack, but to show that humanity was unafraid. Against impossible odds, they cut through the air, their trails painting streaks of defiance across the night sky. The alien ships reacted, charging with energy, but the fighters did not falter. The world watched in awe as those tiny machines faced giants without fear. This was the true clash of wills. No words were spoken, but a conversation was written in fire and light. The visitors demanded submission, and humanity answered with stubborn defiance. Neither side retreated. Neither side gave in. The skies burned with tension, and the seas shook with power, but the line held. In homes across the planet, people began to feel something unexpected: pride. They were still afraid, but they were no longer hopeless. Humanity had not been erased. Humanity had stood. The clash had not destroyed them, it had revealed their strength. But deep inside, everyone knew the storm was not over. The visitors had not unleashed their full power, not yet. They had only tested, only tasted the will of humanity. The true battle was still to come. Yet even so, the message of this clash would echo forever. Earth would not kneel. As the alien ships slowly withdrew, back into the higher skies, the world felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. The threat had not passed, but humanity had survived the first test, and in that survival was a seed of something greater, a unity, a determination, a spirit that no force in the universe could easily crush. The clash of wills had ended without total destruction, but it left behind a scar in the sky and a fire in the hearts of billions. The world knew now that the time of waiting was over. The storm had broken, and humanity had answered, and so, as the night sky returned to its quiet darkness, the people of Earth whispered to themselves the truth they now believed. This time, they would not be erased. This time, they would fight. The night after the clash, the world was silent. Cities that were always alive with sound seemed to hold their breath. People stayed glued to their screens, waiting for any word about what would happen next. The alien ships had pulled back into orbit, leaving behind a sky filled with questions. No one knew if they would strike again, or if they had simply gone to prepare for something bigger. But what everyone knew was this: something had changed forever. Humanity had not been erased. They had not bowed. The entire planet had watched. Ordinary men and women in fragile warships stand against giants, and that single act became a spark of unity unlike anything Earth had ever seen. For centuries, nations had argued, fought, and competed. But now, the threat was not against one country. It was against the entire human race. And that realization created something new, a shared determination, a will to survive together. From the smallest village to the largest city, people felt the same truth in their hearts. This time they would not let history end in silence. The leaders of the world gathered in an emergency meeting. Normally, such gatherings would be full of suspicion and rivalry, but now every face carried the same expression: fear mixed with resolve. No one wasted time blaming or arguing. The question was not who should act, but how should we act together? Scientists shared everything they knew about the strange ships. Military commanders revealed technologies that had once been secrets, offering them freely for the defense of all. Engineers worked day and night to prepare defenses that could give humanity even the slightest edge. And through it all, billions of ordinary people stood ready to support however they could. The skies above Earth became busier than ever before. Satellites and space stations that had once been used for exploration or communication were now being repurposed for defense. Factories shifted their production lines overnight. Families sent their loved ones to serve, not just in the military, but in every way possible. Pilots, technicians, builders, even farmers working to ensure food supplies would not fail. The moment that changed history was not only the clash itself, it was the awakening that came afterward, the realization that fear could no longer be allowed to rule them. Humanity had lived too long in the shadow of past defeats, always remembering the ancient stories of civilizations that had been wiped away. But this time, people refused to accept that fate. And then, it happened. The alien ships returned. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, forming a wall across the sky. Their sheer size made the oceans beneath them look small. This time there was no hesitation. They moved with purpose, descending lower, filling the horizon with their terrifying forms. Every radar, every satellite, every screen confirmed it. This was no test. This was an invasion. The world held its breath again, but this time, the fear was different. It was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It burned like fuel, driving courage into the hearts of those who stood ready. On the seas, Earth's warships formed a united fleet. Nations that had once been enemies now sailed side by side. In the skies, squadrons of fighters flew together, their trails weaving across the air like threads of defiance. And in orbit, the first human-built weapons designed for space lit up, locking onto the approaching vessels. The first strike came from above. A beam of light brighter than the sun split the clouds, lashing down at one of Earth's carriers. 4. A heartbeat. Everyone thought it was over. But the carrier's new shielding system, developed in secret and rushed into place after the clash, held strong. The ship shook, the decks trembled, but it did not fall. The cheers that erupted across the planet were louder than thunder. Humanity had taken the first hit and survived. The response was immediate. Earth's ships unleashed their firepower. Missiles streaked through the sky. Railguns roared. And for the first time in history, human weapons struck against alien armor. The explosions lit up the night like fireworks, and though the alien vessels absorbed much of the damage, the message was clear. Humanity could fight back. What followed was chaos and courage, fear and fire. The seas boiled with battle, the skies tore apart with streaks of light, and orbit became a storm of flashing energy. The alien ships pressed forward with relentless power, but humanity matched them with unyielding will. Every time a ship was lost, another filled its place. Every time fear threatened to break them, courage pulled them back together. And then came the moment that changed history forever. One of Earth's warships, damaged and nearly out of power, refused to retreat. Surrounded by 3 alien vessels, it was given a simple order: hold the line. Its crew knew what it meant. They were unlikely to survive, but instead of despair, they answered with determination. With systems failing and alarms screaming, they turned their ship directly toward the enemy. The commander gave one final message, not of surrender, but of defiance. It was broadcast across every channel, reaching billions of people on Earth. We will not kneel. We will not break. If this is our end, let it be written in fire that humanity stood. With that, the warship ignited its engines, pushing forward with everything it had. The alien vessels fired, tearing into its hull, but still it advanced. At the last possible moment, with its systems collapsing, the crew unleashed a final strike. A weapon never meant to be used in desperation. The explosion was blinding. For a moment, the ocean itself seemed to rise into the sky. And when the light faded, one of the alien vessels, so massive, so untouchable, was gone. Destroyed. The silence that followed was greater than any sound. For the first time in living memory, humanity had done the impossible. They had not only resisted, they had struck back and won. The alien fleet did not retreat immediately. They lingered, their ships glowing with unreadable signals. But for reasons no one could explain, they did not continue their assault. Slowly, one by one, they pulled back, rising higher into the atmosphere and then vanishing into the blackness of space. The battle was over. Humanity had survived. The cost was great: ships destroyed, lives lost, cities shaken, but what remained was far greater. The fear that had haunted humanity for generations was gone. The shadow of defeat had been broken. For the first time in history, the people of Earth no longer saw themselves as fragile or doomed. They saw themselves as something more, something strong, unbreakable, defiant. The moment that changed history was not only the destruction of an alien ship, it was the birth of a new identity. Humanity was no longer prey. Humanity was no longer waiting to be erased. Humanity was ready to stand as equals in the universe. From that day forward, the story of Earth was no longer one of survival alone. It was a story of courage, unity, and the fire that no enemy could extinguish. And in the quiet that followed, the people of Earth whispered words that would echo through all generations to come. This time, we were not afraid.